Hello and welcome to a special episode of our Discworld lore series. This one will be outside our normal episode numbering, as it is a special episode for Pride Month this year. In honour of our friends all across the rainbow, I'll be going through this small expose on an example of sexuality and gender representation and reactions within the Discworld novels. We'll be going through things in no particular order, so if you feel like I missed anything or you want to expand on a point, feel free to do so in the comments below. And, as it's needless to say, spoilers for the books involved. So, let's begin. One thing that will probably jump to mind for most readers in this subject is the Dwarfs. Since all dwarves are short, have beards, and wear layers of leather and chainmail armour, telling one's gender at sight is tricky, if not downright impossible in many cases. This fact over centuries of culture has had a deep effect on how dwarves view their women, that is to say, as men. To a hardline traditionalist dwarf, the only time a dwarf should admit that he is in fact a she is in the presence of his significant other in private. It was only in recent history that this began to change under the influence of interacting with women and female culture in human cities, such as Ankh-Morpork. The first dwarf we know to have started this movement was Cheery Littlebottom of the City Watch. We'll go into more detail about these events and the movement of feminism started throughout dwarven society in a later series, probably even more focused on the dwarves. But for now, I do find it interesting that the way this prejudice is displayed in the books is as a curious reversal of what we saw in our world. The dwarf men reacting to their women dressing as women in much the same way as, back at the turn of the century here on Roundworld, there were negative reactions to women dressing like men and moving in traditionally male job fields. In addition, I'm certain that any transgender readers who read Cheery's story arc back in her first book, Feet of Clay, will be able to experience a fellow feeling as she experiences her own species equivalent of dysphoria and a desire to express herself as a female. While this might not have been the original purpose of the arc when it was first written in 1996, it certainly stands the test of time as a well-written and believable struggle for self-identity, with a sprinkle of Terry's trademark humour, of course. Still on the subject of the dwarfs, the next thing I'd like to bring up is Pepe from Unseen Academicals. Pepe is an anomaly, to be sure. The romantic and business partner of the dwarf jeweller and tailor Madame Shan, a self-declared female dwarf queen of the mine that is her emporium in Ankh-Morpork known as Shatter. Pepe's exact gender is a smidge ambiguous, as he appears to be male in the biological particulars and uses the pronouns for it, but when explicitly asked about it by Glenda, Shan dismisses the subject with simply saying that Pepe is Pepe. A statement that hints at a number of possibilities without confirming anything very much, especially when combined with his flamboyant persona and his allusions to his youth, experiencing prejudice for having one or two other little preferences when growing up in the Morpork district of Lobbin Clout, suggesting that he is at the very least bisexual. What is interesting is that Pepe is human, but presents as a dwarf, having gone through the necessary rites and knowing the right people with Madame Shan's help. He prescribes to dwarven culture as wholeheartedly as one born into the species, same for the more traditional aspects of gender politics and your attitude towards trolls. From the same book, we have the interesting case in the form of Professor Bengo Macarona of the University in Genua. The notion that wizards need to be celibate is not one that the hot-blooded Genuans care much for, leading to the circumstances that Ponder Stibben had to explain to his Arch-Chancellor Mustrum Ridcully. Bengo got involved in an affair that led to the couple's divorce, with the awkward point for Ponder being that Bengo had, in point of fact, been sleeping with the man of the couple when the affair was discovered. Despite his worries, however, Ponder found that Ridcully didn't have any real issue with the circumstances, saying that how he feels there isn't enough love in the world, and not seeing why people would make such a fuss, citing an old member of his UU rowing team, Professor Hayden. As far as we know, Bengo is entirely interested in men, but the aforementioned Madame Shan does show an interest in him, although we never see the outcome of this particular venture on her part, though Pepe considers that Bengo would be interested beyond the shadow of a doubt in any proposals she might make. Moving away from the primarily male side of the rainbow, we have our female representation all throughout the book Monstrous Regiment. Quite apart from its overall themes of women in disguise taking part in male-dominated careers and the stereotypes and prejudices experienced by both genders in a religiously dominated society, as we see in Borogravia, we are also introduced to Discworld's first, to my knowledge, lesbian couple. Magda and Tilda, also known throughout most of the book by their male nicknames of Tonka and Lofty. They joined the army after running away from a very strict and unpleasant all-girls school known as the Girls' Working School in the town of Muntz. Their lifestyle inside the place is something that we only know very vague but very dark allusions to from the girls themselves, for it leaves Magda with what she calls a lack of middle gears, being casually in favour of violence and prone to mood swings in that direction when angry or when anyone threatens Tilda. Tilda, meanwhile, has developed a dedicated pyromania while otherwise being quiet, shy, and socially awkward soul, who only ever really looks at ease when in the company of her partner, and the pair are near frequently holding hands as much as possible, not as observed by Polly in the manner of lovers holding hands, but in the manner of two people stuck on a cliff, frightened that the other will fall. In Tonka's words, they are all the other has in the entire world. I can hardly blame them. Before we move on from Monstrous Regiment, I'd like to bring up the curious case of Sergeant Jackram. We're getting into major spoilers here, so if you do want to skip this in case you haven't read the book, just to avoid a big spoiler, I'll leave a little timestamp. At the end of the story, we learn that Jackram is indeed female alongside most of the cast. However, unwilling to retire and become some fat old biddy, in her own words, she ultimately decides to remain in disguise as a man for the remainder of her years, living out her life as Sergeant Major Jackram, a respected, if retired, army officer. In Jackram's own words of, "When you live a lie too long, you forget what the truth is," it could very well be that Jackram is in truth, and when interpreted in a certain light, the disc's most prominent transgender character to appear in the novels. Interestingly, one of the most alluded to aspects of the LGBT+ spectrum within the books is asexuality, the lack of any sexual drives at all. This is a trait that Pratchett enjoys particularly highlighting in any particularly very driven individuals, those who are seemingly free of vices of the flesh or otherwise, most prominently perhaps the clockmaker Jeremy Clarkson, who we meet in the book Thief of Time. But there is also some fan speculation about Havelock Vetinari, an equally driven man who, while certainly having a relationship with the vampire Lady Margalotta of Uberwald, it does seem to be neither a physical or even romantic relationship, but the pair are very close in their goals and outlines. Quite what Vetinari's preferences are and what the details of his relationship with Lady Margalotta are, I fear something that we'll never learn, but it certainly gives us a lot to speculate about. One thing that the books bring up a lot is a factor that plays no major role in our world for self-evident reasons, but is a big deal for the interspecies cities like Ankh-Morpork. The idea of interspecies relationships and romance. Overall, the idea is accepted by most people save the traditionalists of each respective race, but ultimately the wide view taken is that love is love and each to their own. In the series we have humans in relationships with dwarfs, demigods, full gods, werewolves, vampires, and even goblins and an orc. And while interspecies romance might not always allow for the siring of children, the world is certainly full of orphans who wouldn't turn their nose up at a happy and welcoming family. As a final point, I wanted to add something a bit more general. To me, an overriding message in all of Terry's works, particularly in the Discworld novels, is that people are always people. Race, faith, nationality, preferences or background, even different species in the case of the books. Other people are always people, always deserving their chance and their right to strive to be good people, regardless of where you come from. Whether you do right or wrong by others is entirely your own choice, not a product of where you're from and what you might have been. It might be a bit of a trite worldview, but I doubt it's one any readers could miss, and I think it's one well worth trying to live by. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.